This is the BraveNewCoin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a BraveNewCoin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Mr. Rekt Capital. Rekt, of course, has been on the show a number of times. Rekt Capital is a pseudo-anonymous cryptocurrency trader and technical analyst and I guess crypto Twitter personality. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Rekt Capital.
Hey, Andy. It's awesome to be back here on the Crypto Conversation. Always great to talk to you.
Always great to talk to you, Rekt. And look, it's quite good timing. Funnily enough, you and I, we do tend to have good timing. Somehow we make it work when we do our kind of twice yearly catch-ups. But like we were supposed to talk, I think, maybe last week or sort of at the end of last month. And, you know, we delayed. And I think, you know, that turned out to be quite auspicious because now that we're sort of in the first week of Uptober, if you like, and as we talk today, you know, Bitcoin is, well, boom, 50,800 as we speak today. So nice timing. That's a good omen to start the month, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when we first scheduled the podcast here, it wasn't as bullish as it is now. So it was better to wait for a little bit more of a bullish time. Uptober. Yeah. What a rally, a breakout actually most recently. And it's at a very pivotal point.
Well, it is, and in sort of more ways than one. You know, it's obviously, I suppose, sitting right under resistance, but you know, in the wider context, you know, we joke about Uptober, but we're really just into the first week of Q4. And so I suppose today I thought it'd be good, Rekt, just to kind of run through a few different scenarios. But, you know, the broader topic that I want to discuss is really, you know, what does Q4 look like? Are we bullish? What are we expecting? And then we'll talk about Bitcoin, altcoins, stock to flow, all that good stuff. But let's start with, I guess, the nitty-gritty of where Bitcoin's price action is right now. Go for gold, mate.
When it comes to Bitcoin's macro price predicament, one of the most important things to mention is that Bitcoin is clearly recovering from its mid-cycle correction, the one that happened back in May, where we saw a 53% crash. And ever since then, we've been forming essentially higher and higher lows on the monthly time frame. We've been seeing consecutive, successive monthly higher lows on the monthly time frame. And that just showcases to us that investors are more than happy to be buying at a premium every time Bitcoin dips. And this tendency is even persisting into October as we see yet another higher low, a fresh new early stage higher low. And that's really important because we need to see this sort of demand growing over time where these bottoms are just Bitcoin bottoms are registering at higher and higher prices. It's a really good bullish tendency. So seeing that sort of price tendency, especially coming out from a mid-cycle correction, that's certainly a bullish event, a bullish turn of events in terms of the technicals. But above all else, really important to note that Bitcoin has also reclaimed a few bullish moving averages. Number one, it's reclaimed the 21-week EMA as a support, and that's a valuable time-tested bull market indicator. And the second thing is that Bitcoin has been able to perform a midterm retest of the Pi cycle 111-day moving average as a support. And historically, this tends to actually proceed further upside to essentially continuing the bull market. So it's great to see these two signs of the 21-week EMA being reclaimed as a support and the Pi cycle moving average being reclaimed as a support as well. Two really important things in just enabling that bullish uptrend. So there's, you know, this is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the macro perspective. If we zoom out even to a broader scale of a few years, you can compare this current cycle to 2013 to 2017, for instance. Andy, you mentioned a few scenarios. So I'm just going to go out and say what I feel could happen based on historically recurring price tendencies. For Bitcoin, Bitcoin could rally to as high as $63,500 and then pull back to 55,000. Perhaps all within this month. Perhaps that pullback happens in November. But generally, the reason I mention this is that whenever we take a look at the Bitcoin logarithmic growth curves, October tends to be a very bullish month where we breach the 0.5 Fibonacci growth curve in this channel. And what that essentially means in a very simplistic language is that when we look at this logarithmic growth curve channel, the bottom of it represents bear market bottoms. The midpoint, the middle point of this channel is basically that 0.5 Fibonacci growth curve. And that's essentially the mid cycle. And the top of that channel is it essentially precedes bull market tops. So we're just below this midpoint in this channel, which is, of course, it goes well with the fact that we're in a mid cycle. So predominantly in Octobers, we tend to see a break of this midpoint in the channel. And when we see a break like that, for instance, in 2013, we saw such a break beyond that level. In 2017, we saw a break beyond that level, but actually that happened in August. So a little bit before schedule, but actually in 2017, we saw that level, that midpoint turn into a support. So essentially, in a nutshell, in 2013, in October, we broke beyond the midpoint of that channel. And in November, we turned that midpoint into a support. So essentially, in the span of 2 months, we saw that midpoint flip from resistance. In the following month, it flipped into support. That was in 2013. In 2017, we saw this midpoint of the channel, of the logarithmic growth curve channel. We saw a break of that midpoint resistance in August. Then we retested it the following month in September, and then retested it again in October as a support. So it took 2 months in 2017 to flip this resistance, this midpoint resistance, into a new support before continuing to the bull market peak. So what I'm trying to say here is that this month in October, we're probably going to see a really important deviation towards the upside beyond this midpoint, because that's the most important thing for Bitcoin to do right now. It needs to break past that midpoint of the logarithmic growth curve channel. Historically, it's been able to do that in October's around this time of the year, in Q4s or late Q3s. So it does look like it's poised to do that. But once we see this upside deviation beyond the midpoint of this logarithmic growth curve channel, there's an upside deviation of 16.5%, which is really interesting to see. That happened in 2013 and in 2017, which are 4 years apart. And that's fantastic to say as well, because 2013 and 2017, 4 years apart. 2017 and 2021, also 4 years apart. And deviations of 16.5% beyond the midpoint of this growth curve channel. Well, that, if we extrapolate that to this cycle, that brings us back to that level of $63.5 thousand for Bitcoin, like I mentioned earlier.
Very nice, Rekt. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there, but I suppose one of the key points is, yeah, just the seasonality of Bitcoin is always interesting. It is fascinating. I mean, I don't have it right here in front of me, but I think, you talked about September being a traditionally down month or a bearish month for Bitcoin. I think something like 6 of the last 8 Septembers have been negative for Bitcoin, but the reverse is also true, of course, for October, and I think that's particularly true in bull markets. It's often Q4 is where things do start to accelerate. And yeah, I thought it was interesting, last night, just as I was going to bed, I checked the Bitcoin price as we tend to do, and I just watched it just tick over to 50k. But no real FOMO or euphoria. It's just sort of expected at this point. And I saw someone, I've got a tweet, what did they say? They said something like, can we all appreciate for a minute that Bitcoin is just hanging out at 50K? No sense of a blow off top, no FOMO. It's just more like no one even gets out of bed for 50K Bitcoin type of 50K. So just casually hanging there, and then, went to sleep and woke up and boom, we're up another $800. So but it feels like, and my feelings are very much irrelevant, but it feels like Bitcoin is just warming up, Rekt.
Absolutely. You've hit nail on the head, Andy. There is no real FOMO happening here. Investors have seen these price points before. They're well accustomed to them by now. Habituation is a thing that does set in, a natural thing for us humans. But I believe the old all-time high of 65,000, much like 20,000 for Bitcoin, well, that's always going to be a psychological inflection point for new investors, especially, who tend to really experience a strong sense of FOMO once those old all-time highs breach. So we'll see the euphoria and the FOMO really materialize and translate into price once those old all-time highs of 65K get breached. But also, this is a mid-cycle correction, or at least a mid-cycle period. Bitcoin is recovering really nicely. And if we enjoyed the first part of this bull market, well, then we're probably going to really love this second part of the bull market, where things are probably going to accelerate a bit more and become a bit more parabolic. And that's definitely going to attract a new wave of retail investment, and not to mention institutional interest.
Absolutely, it will. So for that to happen, though, for us to, I suppose, get back to breach that old all-time high from, it's about 64K from April of this year. But, Bitcoin does have a little work to do. So we're sitting at, about 50,700 as we speak now, and that's up basically 21% in the last 7 days. So, what we're sitting right at a reasonably strong resistance at the moment. Is this potentially a consolidation point? Could we take a little breather here? Need some fairly significant momentum to push on?
Well, when we think about consolidation in general, we have to think about consolidation through the lens of reaccumulation on a more monthly scale. So when we consider the crash in May, well, it's been, since that time, many months have passed, and we've been forming this triangle or flagging structure on the weekly time frame. So if we think about consolidation and potential cooling off, well, it's important to note that we've been consolidating for a long time, macro-wise. We've been in a reaccumulation range for a long time. But Andy, I suppose you mentioned in terms of what might happen more in the short term. And at the moment, it's interesting to see how, if we just cycle back to early September, Bitcoin rejected from 52,800 and then enjoyed is a big word, but experienced a downtrend for 3 weeks before bottoming at around 39K. And then Bitcoin has since recovered. And now it's at 50,700, right back at that downtrending resistance that actually started that rejection at 52,800. So the point I'm trying to make here is that rejection that happened in early September, well, it got bought up quite well now that we're at this resistance once again. So that buy side interest is really, really great here, especially since we got a weekly higher low on that bottom. So lots of buy side interest there. And now that we're at this resistance, it really does bring this resistance into question. Well, if it wasn't able to reject price too deeply, because let's just put a figure here, that was a rejection of 25% since September, early September, to 39K, and then we've recovered. Then 25%. It calls into question this downtrending resistance is actually weakening in its sell side pressure. It's not really capable of rejecting price too lower, because the last time it rejected price was in mid-May. We saw a correction of 51% then, and now we saw recently 25%. You're seeing a declining tendency in these rejections. This resistance is weakening, and it's just a matter of time before it finally breaches.
I like the way you think, Rekt, and I suppose another way of expressing that sentiment is simply that, you know, a lot of that early sell pressure, if you like, at these price levels was potentially exhausted the first time around. Of course, there's always still more sell pressure, but I think, you know, people are now kind of expecting higher prices, so perhaps there will be less sell pressure. And we see that, you know, the on-chain guys have been talking about this for months, really, right? You know, the Willy Woos and the Will Clementes of this world. And by on-chain guys, I just mean, you know, they've been talking about the kind of accumulation, as you talk about. We've been in the accumulation zone. So long-term holders have simply been accumulating and will continue to do so. So perhaps smart money, if you like. And I also saw that just because of Bitcoin's, you know, roaring back into life in the last week or so, Bitcoin is once again the best performing asset class of 2021. Obviously, you know, a lot of altcoins have done better than Bitcoin, but in terms of, you know, asset classes, so when we're comparing Bitcoin to, you know, everything from commodities to gold to small cap stocks, large cap stocks, treasury, bonds, precious metals. I mean, gold is down 7.9% on the year, precious metals down almost 20%. And, you know, commodities have had a good year, 36%. But Bitcoin year to date, bang on 50%, really. And you'd think that, you know, just the kind of the macro investors, that's the kind of stuff that they will take notice of. And just as Bitcoin gets much less risky, it becomes more attractive. We have even had, you know, Mr. Powell, chairman of the Fed, essentially saying last week that he had no intention, or the US had no intention of banning Bitcoin and other crypto assets. So that, you know, was just one of the kind of the macro triggers, if you like, that gave Bitcoin some of this momentum. But it's just becoming a more attractive proposition to everyday investors right across the kind of investment asset class, right?
Absolutely. And that's a stark contrast to what we had, to the environment that we had to experience back in May, when Elon Musk was no longer interested in Bitcoin, saying that it's not energy efficient. And then we had the China FUD, and even earlier than that, we had a lot of mining focused FUD as well, where miners were basically not allowed to mine Bitcoin any longer. So miners in China had to relocate somewhere else to do business. And it looks like things have picked up since then. The data science suggests that miners have been able to get past that.
That's right. Hash rate is accelerating very quickly, and the difficulty adjustment has increased as a result. So, yeah, I mean, that just shows everyone wants to get those miners back on the network.
Exactly. And it's just about weathering the storms. There are going to be many storms throughout this bull cycle, and it's just about weathering the storm and persisting, staying patient, waiting for those pullbacks on Bitcoin. But it's going to be increasingly difficult to wait for those pullbacks, because we've had a really extensive reaccumulation period here. So those lower levels are going to be hard to come by. We certainly will see healthy retraces once we do go parabolic and enjoy the second part of the cycle. But of course, we won't be able to see those low levels that we saw in July, June, and May.
Oh, one of the other, you know, I talked about Mr. Powell at the Fed giving an indication that there's no intention of banning Bitcoin and crypto assets, which just, it just de-risks crypto as an asset class a little bit more for institutions and the like. Another growing narrative, and of course, look, it's the Bitcoin ETF, right? And this has been a narrative since 2017, really. And to date, the SEC has just consistently denied all ETF applications, and even I think last week we saw their usual pattern. They push out the decision-making process right to the final date, and then they deny them. That's been the pattern. But there is I think a growing expectation that this time around, Mr. Gary Gensler, Big Gary at the SEC, perhaps are going to approve a Bitcoin futures-based ETF, right, as the first US based Bitcoin ETF. So I just wonder what your thoughts are there, Rekt. I don't know if you have a sense of how likely that is. I think, I've seen people say it's probably 70 to 80% likely. Heard this before, of course, but yeah, is that kind of stuff, can it be priced in? Or, I mean, my sense is if that is approved, oh wow, that could give some serious momentum to Bitcoin this quarter. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a very strong catalyst in the fundamental sense, which would really propel Bitcoin into those parabolic highs. But as a technical analyst, I feel like the data is already there on chain, where we can see that long-term hodlers aren't giving up. They're accumulating dollar cost averaging on dips. And in fact, it's the short-term investors who are more new to the market who tend to panic sell on these retraces. So we're seeing a lot of on-chain data that supports that, but we're also seeing the macro price action, which is really preparing and gearing up Bitcoin for a strong move in the coming weeks. And it's interesting to see, because as a technical analyst, I feel like all of this data is already there. We're seeing these technical patterns evolve. And then suddenly, boom, we get a catalyst that's positive, which propels this move and supports it with the technicals. So I feel like fundamentals and technicals are two sides of the same coin. But sometimes those technicals can really precede those fundamental catalysts. And of course, a Bitcoin ETF would be a fantastic catalyst to propel price towards the upside. But I'm just wondering, as a technical analyst, looking at the technicals, the on-chain data, does Bitcoin really need that ETF? For sure, it would definitely come in handy in terms of propelling price towards the upside. But it feels like Bitcoin is already really well geared towards upside at this present time.
Absolutely. And well, if that's the case, then interested in what you see happening with alts, right? Because, really, ever since Bitcoin did achieve that all-time high of 64K back in April, has effectively been either on a downtrend or sideways consolidating since then. But we have seen some incredible performances of various altcoins, particularly, I suppose, the next generation smart contract platform blockchain projects. I'm thinking of Solana, performed exceptionally well. Even Cardano, had an incredible run. Dogecoin had an incredible run more towards the start of the year. What happens in Q4 in terms of Bitcoin versus altcoins? Do they both outperform? Or is it Bitcoin's turn, or will alts kind of catch up and then outperform again? What do you think?
That's a really good question, and a really complex question as well, because the thing with Bitcoin market cycles and altcoin market cycles, they co-occur, but altcoin market cycles tend to lag a bit behind Bitcoin, which is why we saw Bitcoin season take over all the way to those May highs of 65K. And then we start to see altcoins really enjoy themselves and make those impressive highs, while money flow was cascading away from Bitcoin on that retrace into other assets. The thing about Bitcoin right now is that it is breaking out from a monthly range. And the thing about that monthly range is that it's pretty much identical to the monthly range that Ethereum is enjoying right now. And it's actually, Ethereum isn't actually breaking out from its monthly range right now. So Bitcoin is leading the market considerably. But the thing with Ethereum is that it tends to follow Bitcoin quite closely once Bitcoin consolidates and cools off a bit. So at the moment, it is going to be Bitcoin season. And of course, if we see Bitcoin break those old all-time highs of 65K, then it is going to be Bitcoin season for sure. But Ethereum is going to be a close follower of Bitcoin. And at the moment, it's still lagging behind it, but it does look primed to follow as well. And the thing about Ethereum at this time, well, in general, Ethereum is a leading indicator for many altcoins. And in terms of the crypto money flow cycle, Bitcoin tends to rally first. Then that money trickles down into large caps, predominantly Ethereum. And then we see that money go into other large caps, then mid caps and small cap altcoins. So naturally, in answering this question, it's important to juxtapose Bitcoin and Ethereum with one another. And it looks like Ethereum is really poised to follow Bitcoin in a breakout uptrend. At the moment, Ethereum is still retesting the top of its monthly range. So it is trying to confirm that breakout. So it won't be a surprise to see Ethereum try to catch up in the coming days, perhaps in the coming week or two. But generally, you mentioned Andy Cardano, and Cardano is, well, it's interesting to see how Bitcoin, or at least Ethereum's price action, is pretty much a copy-paste version of Cardano's price action. And Cardano was lagging severely behind Ethereum for a lot of this cycle. And then it had the fork. Cardano had that fork come out, and then we saw Cardano really outpace Ethereum, in fact. So it was lagging behind Ethereum because Ethereum was forming a U-shaped reversal on the monthly time frame. And ADA Cardano was actually forming that same formation, but with some lag. It was at a different phase in that price progression, a little earlier on in forming that U-shaped reversal, but forming that U-shaped reversal nonetheless. And now we actually saw Cardano really form that U-shaped reversal and even outpace Ethereum quite significantly. So it's all about watching for these recurring patterns across altcoins, and a recurring pattern of this U-shaped reversal is also observable in the altcoin market cap. Altcoin market cap is essentially a copy paste of what Ethereum is doing. So if Ethereum continues to follow Bitcoin, Ethereum is going to break to new all-time highs, but so will altcoin market cap. So we're going to see tremendous growth in Ethereum, in Bitcoin, and also in the altcoin market cap. But we know that all altcoins can't ascend together. Some are going to take center stage, like Solana. You mentioned Cardano or Dogecoin a little earlier. So we're always going to see these selective altcoin leaders take center stage and contribute to that altcoin market cap growth. But nonetheless, Ethereum is always going to be the main altcoin market cap growth generator because it is number 2 on CoinMarketCap. So Ethereum is going to be that leading indicator. It's going to be important, but altcoin market cap does look set for new highs. Ethereum does too, Bitcoin as well. My only concern is going to be altcoin dominance, which is a separate topic in of itself, because when we compare current altcoin dominance, we're seeing an altcoin dominance of 56%. And we've not seen those highs in altcoin dominance since June 2018, April 2018, December 2017, and June 2017. So only a handful of times where altcoin dominance was at these highs before sharply retracing. So we are at those precarious highs. And some people are saying that altcoin dominance will even break beyond 60 to new all-time highs. I'm just wondering what has to happen for such a historic event to take place, because we've been at these highs before, we've rejected from these highs before. And I'm just wondering, now that we've overextended to a certain extent, can we generate that additional buy pressure for investors to really allocate their assets into more altcoins? And will that altcoin dominance continue to grow higher?
Yeah, well, it will be, again, say this all the time, but fascinating to see how this all plays out. Imagine some people who've done very well out of altcoins will potentially secure some of those gains by just allocating some of that capital back to Bitcoin, just in case Bitcoin does crazy Bitcoin things, which is always possible. And so I guess in the context of that, Mr. Rekt, just while I've got you on the show, it'd be good to just touch on some of these other kind of big question marks or narratives, if you like. Just love to get your hot takes on them. So, for example, one, of course, would be, whether Bitcoin stock to flow still has a role to play here. And it's a bit controversial. Some people have really poo-pooed it, but it is a dominant narrative in this space. And you got to give Plan B credit for really sticking to it. And price kind of has hung in there. And but I think Plan B has said that for stock to flow to remain intact, Bitcoin does need to hit 100k, if not more, by December. So what do you think? Bitcoin 100k, is that on the table for Q4?
The stock to flow model is truly a compelling model. And I've really spent some time in analyzing the upside deviations of this model in the Rekt Capital newsletter, where I talk about upside deviations beyond the stock to flow line, because these upside deviations tend to precede bull market peaks. And we haven't seen that upside deviation in this current market cycle. We've seen them in previous market cycles, and every time we see a upside deviation beyond the stock to flow line, we tend to see a few weeks where we see that topping out. So we're nowhere close to that yet happening. So that's a really interesting thing, because the bull market is still intact and we're still nowhere close to the peak happening. So to answer your question, Andy, about 100K, is that possible for Q4? I'd like to segment this question more into the technical steps that Bitcoin needs to perform. Like I mentioned earlier in the show today, Bitcoin needs to break that midpoint channel resistance. And that midpoint channel resistance is currently located for the month of October, because this resistance is a dynamic one. So it inclines over time. For October, that resistance is 54,000, roughly speaking. In November, it's going to be 58,000. So this month, we need to breach and monthly candle close above 54,000. If we do get that, and it's likely that we'd be able to upside deviate to as far as 63,000 and a half. Once we upside deviate towards 63 and a half, and monthly candle close at around those price levels above 54K especially, and then see a pullback later on in November, potentially to 55K, for instance, to just stabilize at that midpoint, Fibonacci midpoint of the growth curve channel. And then if 2017 is any indicator, we could see that stabilization at around 55K to go into December even. So if we look at 2013 and we see this breakout retest happen inside 2 months, and then the revisit of the growth curve channel to essentially precede the bull market top, that happens in 1 month. And in 2017, we see the breakout retest and then retest happen. So that's a retest of 2 months. So comparing to 2013, that's twice as long. And then once we see that retest, we see Bitcoin take 3 months to reach the bull market peak. So I'm just wondering, number one, are these retest attempts extending in time? And number two, once these retest attempts of the midpoint channel from resistance to support, once these retests happen, does it take a little bit longer of a time to reach the top of the bull market? So the top of the bull market, what could that be? That also inclines over time. Let's say we top out in February, that would be at around 155,000. If we top out in January, that would be around 150,000. So it really does depend when those retests happen on the technical scale and how many months we see after that retest. And the more months afterwards relative to this channel, we'd get a better anticipation of where could that bull market peak. So just to tie this back into your question, 100K possible this year. I'm not entirely sure about that. New all-time highs this year, that's probably a high likelihood scenario. But 100K this year, that could be a bit of a stretch. But at the same time, really important to note that it's also going to be a crucial Q4 in giving us insight into whether this is a 4-year cycle where we're actually starting to see lengthening cycles play out.
Well, that was actually what I was going to ask you next, right? So if Bitcoin does eventually get that blow off top, which is, I suppose, what you expect to see at the peak of the bull market when that euphoria is in full swing. And if we do get that blow off top, then that's when you'd expect the deviation to the upside, because you talked about we have seen plenty of downward deviation on the stock to flow model. But yeah, so if we do get that blow off top, you mentioned the 4-year cycle, right? And I think, that's obviously based on Bitcoin's halving cycle, and we've seen 2 or 3 4-year cycles play out in Bitcoin to date. But yeah, I think as you're leading up to talk about Mr. Rekt Capital, a lot of analysts are talking about perhaps that 4-year cycle is increasingly less relevant, and now it's more lengthening cycles, or even kind of just shorter, less intense bear markets, right? So yeah, well, what are your thoughts on how that potentially could play out? And I guess love you to hit on, do we see an extended or intense 80% drawdown bear market of the likes that we have seen in the past if we do get that blow off top?
So to answer the question of the bear market, we'd probably see an average 84.5% bear market. We've seen those sort of bear markets across time. So I feel like there's little doubt that we'd see such a stark correction. I mean, we saw minus 53% this past May. So yeah, a minus 84.5% average correction that we tend to see over time, that's probably going to be at a high likelihood. But when talking about this 4-year cycle, when we look at price action to 2012, for instance, when that first halving occurred, the following year, we saw exponential growth in Bitcoin's price action, but not without a crash. We saw a mid-cycle crash of around 80% during that year of 2013. And we saw that mid-cycle correction get recovered, and we saw Bitcoin rally to new all-time highs. But if we focus on the 4-year cycle, that being candle number 1 of the new 4-year cycle, you can't really see a mid-cycle correction there. If you zoom out to the 12-month time frame, you can't see that crash anywhere. And it's interesting to see that in 2016, we had a halving. And then in 2017, we once again saw the beginning of a new 4-year cycle, candle number 1, which was exponential and saw new all-time highs. And now 4 years later, we saw the halving in 2020, once again preceding candle number 1 in a new 4-year cycle. And we had a mid-cycle correction here, but zooming out to the 12-month time frame, you can't actually see that mid-cycle crash in candle number 1. So the reason I mention this is that candle number 1 in this 4-year cycle is very similar to candle 1 in the 4-year cycle that started in 2013. You can't see those mid-cycle crashes. Now, my only concern here is, of course, because we had a mid-cycle crash of 5 months, it was 5 months long, essentially. Does this mean we're going to extend in the bull run going forward? Can this bull run extend into 2022? And there is some sensible reason to believe that that could be the case. But the thing with 4-year cycles is candle number one tends to perform new all-time highs, exponential candle growth, and then Bitcoin prints an upside wick. And then in candle number two, which would be in 2022 for this 4-year cycle, we then see a 84.5% bear market according to 4-year cycles. And we form a lower high on the candle one and candle two. So that's essentially the upside wick in candle one is higher than the upside wick in candle two, and that's a lower high. And if we get that sort of lower high in 2022, then that's probably going to be some bearish confirmation that this indeed was a 4-year cycle, especially if Bitcoin reaches the top of its logarithmic growth curve channel and peaks at around those areas. But I'd refute the 4-year cycle theory if Bitcoin has broken to new all-time highs, but hasn't reached the top of that channel yet, maybe entered some consolidation at highs in the 70Ks, for instance, where the pi cycle resistance is, for instance. In any case, I'd refute the 4-year cycle theory, or at least just say that we're seeing lengthening cycles if Bitcoin is far away from the logarithmic growth curve channel top resistance, because I feel that that's the most important thing in dictating where Bitcoin will peak. The top of that channel needs to be revisited. It tends to be revisited in bull market history, and tying that together with the upside deviation on the stock to flow model, because the upside deviation will begin once $84,500 is breached for Bitcoin. So if we stay below that level until the end of the year, then that's probably going to be a contributing sign that we're going to see that cycle lengthen a bit, and that 4-year cycle is going to get distorted. So all these different perspectives are here at play, and it's all about trying to find a cohesive way to marry them, just to add another layer of understanding, to broaden our picture of understanding in terms of trying to understand where Bitcoin could peak, what technicals to look at, and trying to fit all these perspectives together.
Very nicely said, Mr. Rekt, and that feels like a nice place to begin to finish off. So, yeah, well, I suppose everyone will be enjoying the prospect of that upside potential deviation towards the top of the channel on Bitcoin. That would be fantastic to see in Q4, but yeah, can't take it for granted. So who knows, bullish or bearish, we'll have to see, but yeah, certainly looking bullish at the moment. But look, it's very early days. We're only in the first week of October, so lots of drama ahead, and no doubt. Finish off the show, Rekt. Give us any final thoughts that you'd like to share, and please do feel free to give a shout out to your YouTube channel. I can see that that's coming on strong, and your newsletter is very popular, I know, on Substack. So look, give us your closing thoughts, and tell the people where they can go to find you.
Yes, Andy, thank you so much for having me on the show. And yes, of course, I am an author of the Rekt Capital newsletter. It is currently the number 4 crypto newsletter globally on Substack. So it's an impressive milestone for me to just have started that from zero, and inside a year, it's being enjoyed by many readers.
Sorry, just say that again. What did you say? What's the 4th?
Yes, so the Rekt Capital newsletter is number 4 crypto newsletter globally on Substack.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's that's quite an achievement. That's what's number 1? Dan Held or something like that. Do you know?
Well, I'd need to check. I think it might be Pomp.
Might, of course, be Pomp. Yeah, but well, this, to be 4, that is that's excellent. So well, congratulations on that. So yeah, do suggest you subscribe, listeners, because that's one of the things, it's always fun to talk to you, Rekt, but, I'm always conscious that it's slightly, it's hard to get into the weeds of technical analysis when we're only audio only. And so, of course, that's the benefit of having a YouTube channel where you can run through the charts, or a newsletter. You can obviously, include all those visual references, which sometimes makes it easier, right?
Absolutely. I do try to create content that appeals to different audiences, because I do like audio, but I also like the visuals as well. And I also like to read newsletters and written reports. So for me, it's all rooted in trying to break down complex topics into first principles and easily digestible nuggets of information that can be practically applied to what we're seeing in the market. But above all else, especially in turbulent times, whether those are my YouTube videos or the newsletter, they can be a calming resource of guidance, just to not panic sell, not to be panicky, because extreme fear tends to precede financial opportunity, and other things like that I like to repeat on the newsletter or on Twitter. So it's all about just unpacking these seemingly complex insights into these easily digestible nuggets, because ultimately it's all about the psychology and these recurring cyclical tendencies that we tend to see in Bitcoin's price action. And for some reason, they tend to repeat over time. History does like to repeat itself. And we are on the cusp of making history once again with Bitcoin. So it is that predictable irrationality that is driving the cyclicality in Bitcoin's market cycles. And the fact that the 2021 market cycle, this mid-cycle correction, is pretty much a copy paste of the mid-cycle correction of 2013, despite being 8 years apart. Well, that's pretty phenomenal to see how things are just so similar, how history is repeating itself. And it all boils down to that human psychology, which is another element that I like to incorporate in my content, because it truly is fascinating. It is an edge to understand that human psychology, because once you understand that human psychology, you understand the market psychology, but also your own. And those are two powerful things to be able to understand, because once you do, then you can navigate the market quite well.
Wonderfully said, Rekt. And just to finish off, a couple of things I'd pick up on what you said there. I love that you said that we could be on the cusp of history, or Bitcoin could be on the cusp of making history. So that always gets the imagination flowing. But also, the market psychology, and it's just rational and irrational human behavior. And listeners, I think Rekt and I, perhaps the first podcast that we did, we really did go quite deep into that aspect of things. So include a link to that podcast if you're interested, because that's one of the keys, of course, to, I guess, particularly successful trading, but also investing as well. But I think, objective analysts like yourself, Rekt, and of course, Josh here at BraveNewCoin, he's very much of the same mold, very objective, and puts out a lot of content on the BraveNewCoin YouTube channel every week. And I always look at the comments and see people say that they always look forward to hearing what Josh has to say every week. And so I think, you guys are doing great work. So keep up the content, and all the best for a fascinating and drama-filled Q4, no doubt, Mr. Rekt.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy, for having me on the Crypto Conversation. I can't wait to be back. It's always great to talk to you.
All right. All the best, and bye for now. All right, there you go. That was Mr. Rekt Capital. Always fun to catch up with Rekt. And we were just talking at the end of the show, and Mr. Rekt pointed out that just as we were talking, Bitcoin has jumped up again now. And so I've just looking at the chart. Bitcoin is now 51,400. So I mean, we were just at 50k when I woke up about 2 hours ago. So it looks like there is some strong bullish momentum around Bitcoin at the moment. So anyway, have to see how this all plays out. You've heard Rekt's thoughts. Yeah, going to be an interesting one. Welcome to Uptober. Welcome to Q4. Thank you for listening to the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation and whatever podcast app you are using. Give us a nice rating in Apple iTunes, all that good stuff. If you want to get at me, Andy@BraveNewCoin.com. But that was the show for today. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.